Harvard University was founded by Puritans in 1638 for training ministers. The earliest presidents of Harvard claimed that there could be no true wisdom or knowledge without Jesus Christ. Other highly esteemed universities, Yale, Princeton, and Dartmouth, had similar beginnings based on Christian principles and doctrines. It would seem absurd to question their present integrity, and I, for one, would not have questioned their integrity, or that of any American school, without having heard reports from students who attest that there are numerous professors who downplay American history while dwelling on the virtues of Marxism and Leninism.
I've been exposed to the Marxist viewpoint by different professors, not only in high school but in the university. I remember, I was thinking back to high school days, junior year I believe it was, when we were studying the American history. And we had a professor, and one thing I distinctly remember was the time he stated in class that the Reagan administration was afraid to let Marxist regimes in Central America exist due to the fact that they knew that they would succeed and the Central American people would be happy with them. I found this quite striking. And basically that whole class, it was labeled an American history class, but the only aspects of American history that we actually studied were those relating to American oppression of third world people, whether it be in Central America or the Indians or whatever aspect it was like that. And a lot of the students, other than myself, also felt that we were being cheated in effect of learning the more important things. We wanted the Founding Fathers, which was something I was very interested in. We grazed over very quickly.
And that was in high school?
That was in high school, junior year. I had heard of other experiences with different professors in that school, but in high school, when I think back, it wasn't anywhere near as bad as it is now in the university. I remember when I first came to the university freshman year, the first quarter I was enrolled in a comparative politics class, and that compared the Soviet Union, the United States, a couple other Western European countries to one another in the different systems. And I had a professor who was from Italy and who called himself a European socialist, but in fact turned out he was more than a socialist, he was a Marxist.
It's not just in the lecturing where the bias and the colleges are present. The school newspapers, which are controlled by the administration and a certain clique of students, censor articles, don't publish others. I've had numerous times where I tried to get articles in and either they don't publish them or they take vitally important parts out, not as a means of editing, but simply because they don't agree with it. And I've had some people on the staff actually tell me that. Speakers that they bring in are almost always very liberal, if not sometimes radical.
I attended the University of Wisconsin in Madison between 1980 and 1983 in the School of Engineering. Studying for an engineering degree kept me quite isolated from classroom style indoctrination of any kind of political philosophies of one kind or another. But the presence of the Marxist influence and its supporters on campus can be experienced in many ways outside of the classroom. For example, I remember attending a social event called the Mifflin Street Block Party, which is an event where they block off an entire street and they sell beer and food and have live musical entertainment. But in between the bands, they would use the stage as a platform for giving political speeches and lectures on the virtues of Marxism. And for example, I recall at the 1981 Mifflin Street Block Party, the speaker was praising the virtues of the Sandinista Marxist government in Nicaragua.
These are not isolated incidents. They are consistent enough to suggest that they are the result of an organized effort. Apparently, the intellectual Marxists are attracted to the vocation of education. In this way, they can propagate their ideology and even proselytize members from the student body at parents' and taxpayers' expense, and in most cases, without their knowledge.
From my experiences at DePaul University in the political science department, and I've taken courses from a lot of the professors, and I've also talked to the other professors, and I've had some as counselors. And my overall understanding is that there is not one moderate to conservative professor out of the entire lot. Out of the group of 10 to 15 professors, all of them are from left moderate all the way to Marxists. And there are actually two professors who call themselves Marxists, and I'll state that at the beginning of your class. I've heard from different students who have had classes, and I've had classes with later with, They said that the professor comes in the first day and says, all right, I don't want any misunderstandings. I'm a Marxist, and this is what I'm going to teach you. You don't get that moderate viewpoint in there anywhere, and you especially never hear the conservative viewpoint.
In the 4 years that Accuracy in Academia has been in existence, they've reported bias-related incidents in over 180 colleges across the United States. Leslie Carbone is Executive Director of Accuracy in Academia. Could you tell us more about Accuracy in Academia?
Accuracy in Academia is a nonprofit public service organization that documents and publicizes the political abuses occurring within the academy.
Are the reports we just heard unique, coming from American college students?
No, not at all. In fact, almost daily I receive complaints from students from various colleges across the country of situations similar to the ones that we've been hearing about today. For example, one of the stories that we wrote about last year concerned a professor at California State University at Long Beach. The professor was an anthropology professor, and he used his own textbook in his anthropology class, which stated in the introduction that he hoped the class would contribute to people's understanding of the need for a worldwide socialist revolution. He explained in the book that this revolution would occur in the United States beginning with the overthrow of the boards of directors of the top 500 financial and industrial corporations and their replacement with socialist directors who would use social need rather than profit maximization as a motive for decision making. The conclusion of the book was entitled Concluding Remarks with Marx and Jesus, and the professor wrote that the world has had three great teachers, Marx, Lenin, and Jesus, and that Marx was clearly the most powerful of these teachers because he understood better than either of the other two the human adventure of our species as a whole, and that Lenin was the most effective because Lenin put together the mechanism, the proletarian vanguard party, through which, quote, 1/3 of our species has liberated itself from imperialist domination. What he has to say about Jesus is that Jesus was a really nice guy, and we should all pay attention to his message of love and charity, and the world would be a better place if more people would do that. But we need to remember that Jesus' message was clearly subversive, because obviously even the Roman imperialists didn't crucify people simply for preaching love. Another story that we wrote about recently concerned the American University in Washington, D.C., where a couple of students contacted us because they felt that their professor was frequently indulging in her own Marxist and anti-American bias in the classroom. And when I called the professor to ask her about those reports, she said, oh yes, a Marxist perspective is being aired in the class. It's very important in the classroom to express a Marxist point of view because that is the perspective that is not adequately represented in the news media.
Are these stories coming from mostly large universities or small colleges?
Primarily they come from the larger schools, although the small colleges are not immune to this problem by any stretch of the imagination.
How about private schools?
There are many abuses occurring at the private colleges across the country. For instance, at Dartmouth, there is a conservative campus newspaper called the Dartmouth Review, and students involved with that paper were kicked out of school because they were assaulted by a radical black professor in the course of trying to write a story on the professor's class. The actions of Dartmouth were so unfair in suspending these students, two of whom were suspended for 18 months and one of whom was suspended for 9 months, that a federal court overturned Dartmouth's action. In contrast, a student convicted of rape at Dartmouth was suspended for only 3 months. Another story that I became aware of very recently concerns a women's studies class at the University of Buffalo in New York, where the students are encouraged to become socialists because socialism is the only means through which women can achieve equality. They are encouraged to become lesbians for the same reason. One of the texts used in the class is blatantly anti-male, anti-American, anti-capitalist, and even anti-white. The book is very much against even white feminists. It's very racist. And I became aware of this class because a friend of mine who had a girlfriend who was taking the class And he sent me the syllabus and some of the other materials from the class. And when I talked to him, I said, "Do you think that your girlfriend would be willing to talk to Accuracy in Academia about this class?" And he said, "Well, no, probably not, because they indoctrinated her. She's a socialist now because they told her socialism was the only way that women could achieve equality." So clearly what the socialists and the Marxists are trying to do on campuses is working. They really are bringing students over to a left-wing ideology, and that's very dangerous.
Steve Snyder was one of those students who was won over to leftist ideology.
I graduated from Prospect High School in 1971 in the top 10% of my class. And I decided to go to the University of Illinois to pursue a pre-med degree. And since I had placed out of a lot of math classes, I filled my schedule in, being an LAS, Liberal Arts and Sciences major, with Philosophy 101. It was in that class that I first encountered the radical ideas of Marx, Lenin, Mao, through a teaching assistant named Alan Meyer, who was, at that point in time, the vice president of Students for a Democratic Society at the University of Illinois in Champaign. In contradistinction to what I was being taught in this philosophy class, I had been raised to believe in hard work, patriotism. I was an Eagle Scout. I was a faithful member of the Episcopal Church and participated in several of the activities that they had and was the leader of the youth group at one point. And I didn't have any idea that there was anything grossly wrong with my country or my belief system or my class orientation or my outlook on life. I didn't think any of those things were that far off the mark. I was pretty much goal-oriented. I was going about pursuing a particular goal, and I was looking forward to college. However, in Philosophy 101, the teaching assistant that I had at that time abbreviated the great wealth of philosophy that Western culture is partly built on and skipped Aristotle, Plato, and focused on Kant, I think, for about a week, and then spent the majority of the class time teaching this introductory philosophy class what he thought real philosophy was, which was dialectical materialism as interpreted by Lenin and Mao and formulated and drawn up by Hegel, Feuerbach, Marx, and Engels. It came as a shock to me that any person could even get away with this. I mean, I was pretty much under the impression that communists were more or less thugs. They were unpopular, but they would force themselves upon a population, assume power, rule by brute force, and would make everything basically miserable and dysfunctional, and it'd only be a certain amount of time before everything would gradually fall apart. That's what I was taught as a younger person. But to hear this teaching assistant speak about the glories of Marxism, it became apparent to me that there might be something to it. Since my church upbringing did not at any time really focus on the truth of God's Word, I had nothing with which to counter the arguments that this philosophy TA was making. And as the war in Vietnam got worse, and I think in May, Cambodia was invaded, and there was a big demonstration on campus, and I became very active in that. I tried to solicit other people to get involved, and my TA, Alan Meyer, informed me. He says, well, there's a number of things you can do to promote the cause of revolutionary socialism or communism, and one of those things would be to participate in this group or that group, or you could try some other avenue. Since I was relatively independent, I decided to sell a newspaper on campus called The Guardian, and I'd order a big bundle of papers, maybe 50 or 100, and I'd sell them to students in the union. And it was a socialist newspaper, and they had a Marxist, Maoist orientation, and although they would point out deficiencies in the Soviet example of socialism, they were still by and large pro-socialist. Every third world uprising, every national liberation struggle was looked upon as a righteous cause. And if you don't know the Lord, righteousness can come in all different sorts of flavors. And for a struggling college student who was trying to decide what he was going to do with his life, if he was really spending his energies wisely, I began experimenting with the thought of being an activist, a social reformer, an activist, or even a communist. And when I began to see some of the real injustices in our own system, that galvanized my mind to becoming totally anti-imperialist, which I equated with my own country.
Steve then gave up his goal of becoming a doctor. He dropped out of school and spent the next 7 years of his life pursuing a goal that was being orchestrated by a corps of revolutionary Marxists.
Through my involvement with a group in the city which was allied with the Revolutionary Communist Party, I became an organizer at different levels. I worked primarily with youth, although I ended up getting a job in a factory to try and organize steelworkers. And it's just that in most factories in Chicago, they've seen communists come and go. They know what you're up to. They figure you out inside of a week or two. And if you stay there more than a few months, you're fairly lucky. Well, I ended up going through several jobs, and it became obvious to me that this life of being a organizer, a working class organizer, was really rough. You didn't get very many breaks. You didn't have very much to live on. Most of the resources that you had, the party would call upon you to donate or sacrifice whatever you had to further the struggle. The Revolutionary Communist Party, they were solid. Their infrastructure and their membership was actually very tight. I was never made a member. I was up for that just before I got saved.
Dr. Schieser is a professor of education at DePaul University in Chicago, Illinois. We chose to interview Dr. Schieser based on his dedication to teaching truth and on his Christian values. Dr. Schieser, have you had any experiences with your colleagues where they have expounded views that were anti-American?
Well, at DePaul, I wouldn't recall that I had any direct confrontation or direct experience, but indirectly I know from my students who take courses with some of my colleagues that they are what I would call innocent Bolsheviks. They are more attached to the leftist and Marxist ideology than what I would call the American ideology. But I have seen this at other colleges, with colleagues at conventions which clearly espoused the socialistic and communistic ideas.
Are students expounding similar views?
Students, most of the time, reflect what they have been taught. I find in my philosophy of education class, where we discuss quite a few of any ideologies, Karl Marx and the Christian and the Judaic, that they have been influenced mostly by professors in their first years of college education and also in high school occasionally. So they do echo what they hear.
Why would they believe in Marxist ideology?
Well, that's pretty much the only thing they heard.
This past quarter, I took a course in geography, and again, they brought in a clergyman to talk about, we talked about different areas of the world, and they brought in a clergyman to talk about Central America. And I had known this clergyman before. I had heard about him on campus. He was a left-leaning member. And he talked about, again, how people in El Salvador and other things are being exploited by the United States.
The communists that I ran into at the University of Illinois were very fond of saying the richest nation in the world is trying to bludgeon a nation of rice farmers into subservience. And in that term, it sounds grossly unfair.
He presented slides of soldiers with guns in their hands saying, look, this is what's happening. They're threatening the people daily in the countryside. And I raised the question, well, isn't it true that there are terrorist attacks occurring every day by the leftist rebels? And he said, yeah, but that's not the point. The point is they're not there protecting the people, they're there threatening the people. And he just misrepresented everything that the picture showed, and he misrepresented the facts. And I really found that annoying. And as the class progressed, I kept asking questions after a slideshow. And the professor, who was teaching the geography course, said, "All right, that's enough. We've heard enough of this now." And they wouldn't let me ask any more questions.
They tried to bring out Sarah Weddington, who is the Roe versus Wade attorney. They were going to pay her $5,000. And then they came to me to get a pro-life speaker. Only they didn't want to pay the pro-life speaker any money. Well, they had to cancel the program because they didn't want to pay any money to a pro-life speaker, as well as the $5,000 to Sarah Weddington.
I think it's atrocious that at some state schools they will pay $10,000 for Angela Davis to come and speak, and yet they wouldn't even consider paying that amount of money to have Pat Buchanan come speak. There's a clear bias and a double standard in presenting speakers on campuses, and I think parents and taxpayers need to be aware of that so that they can fight it.
Students are encouraged to donate to left-wing causes on campus, even if it means giving up their lunch.
For example, there is a group called Oxfam America. What they do is they set up with the cafeteria manager of the school to have the money deducted from their meal program instead of money, because they realize that students don't have that much money to donate. What Oxfam does is they raise money under the pretenses of world hunger and play up on the sympathy of the people, particularly in third world countries. They do not give any money directly to the poor people or any food directly to the poor people in those countries. As a matter of fact, there are numerous counts, and I have a report here from an article from the Council for Inter-American Security, and my organization, Young Americans for Freedom, has also done a report, and Human Events published an article, and there are a number of other publications. So it's not just coming from one source, that they actually give money to communist guerrillas in other countries. For example, they've actually had luncheons for the FMLN, which is the communist guerrillas in El Salvador, who are currently trying to overthrow the government there.
Mike was called in by the Dean of Students after distributing literature to warn students about Oxfam's activities.
I have no problem, I told him, with helping people in other countries who happen to live in communist countries. I do have a problem with supporting communist guerrillas and communist governments.
In William Foster's book, Toward Soviet America, the communists plainly state their intentions. Among the elementary measures the American Soviet government will adopt to further the Cultural Revolution are the following. The schools, colleges, and universities will be coordinated and grouped under the National Department of Education and its state and local branches. The studies will be revolutionized, being cleansed of religious, patriotic, and other features of the bourgeois ideology. The students will be taught on the basis of Marxian dialectical materialism, internationalism, and the general ethics of the new socialist society.
Have you had other questionable experiences at Elmhurst?
Yeah, a number of them, as a matter of fact, not just at Elmhurst, but even in high school. And a few of the outrageous statements that were made, taught as fact in different classes, history, philosophy, political science of different kinds, economics, taught, some of these quotes were, for example, most small businessmen are radical right-wing like the LaRouches and neo-Nazis. Ronald Reagan wants to destroy America. The Soviet Union and communism was never any threat to the United States, and even if it were, I'm not certain whether it'd be worth defending. And faith in anything, especially God, is ignorant and irrational. What we need is a one-world government. Capitalism is evil. Socialism brings out good in people. This was in high school, written down as chalkboard on the chalkboard as textbook examples of what the definition of these terms are. Our founding fathers were frauds. They beat their slaves, cheated on their wives, and were really only for their own self-interests. And this is just a few and that I collected over the years, and these are pretty much verbatim. They are not taken out of context or twisted around.
Currently I'm taking a course in modern political thought, and the topic now that we're studying is Marxism. And again, the professor that I have the same professor now that I had before, because it's only taught by that one professor and you have no choice in which professor you want to take. And these are required courses for my major being political science, and I have to take these courses with these professors. Otherwise, I can't graduate in my major. I remember he stated in class quite often how the United States was behind the times in comparison to the European countries and the Soviet Union, that we were behind the times due to the fact that our government wasn't centralized enough. The government didn't control enough of the aspects of the people's lives. And that was one of the most amazing things I had ever heard, that the United States was behind the times because we had, in effect, too much freedom. The people were allowed to make too many choices. The professor, his key thing in that class was, show me facts, but when the facts were shown to him, he wasn't willing to accept them. In the latter part of the class, he brought in a Soviet newspaper spokesman, in effect, from the Soviet embassy, a Soviet-type reporter. I'm not sure actually what agency he is with. And he brought in that person, and that person was, in effect, supposed to tell us about how the Soviets feel about ourselves and how they view their foreign policy. And it was supposed to be a discussion-type class. And again, myself and this other student who were aware of the facts questioned this person from the Soviet embassy. This other student brought up, the Soviet embassy spokesman said that the Soviet Union is no longer seeking global hegemony, and they were seeking a peaceful cooperation with the United States, and they weren't really looking for confrontation with the United States, and they didn't no longer believe that all the problems in the world were created by the United States. And this other student brought up some quotes from an interview with Gorbachev with Time magazine, and some other quotes from Gorbachev, where that totally contradicted what the Soviet spokesman had just said. Gorbachev had stated that Marxism and communism is the true way, and that most of the problems in the world are created by the United States and capitalism and things like that. And the Soviet spokesman just said, well, you can't take us at our word all the time. You can't really pay attention because it's political talk and it doesn't mean that much. Throughout the entire class, he tried to put over a scam on everybody in that room.
In this philosophy class, which was an introductory philosophy class, that's where it all really hit me. I wasn't recruited per se to become a member of any particular organization, but there were always activities going on that would gravitate you closer and closer to the kind of people who would want to recruit you.
On the back page of the Madison Insurgent, they have a section that's appropriately entitled Calendar of the Left. On here they have a week's activities of on-campus extracurricular events that people can go to, films, speeches, things like that, study groups. This entire page covers 1 week of activities. There's probably about 5 or 6 to 10 activities per day. Samples of some of the activities. These are all held on the university in the social sciences building and in the union and that sort of thing. Capitalism, socialism, and the revolution. A contemporary meaning of revolution in the West. Another one is the socialist renewal and the problem of the party. Another one held in the Memorial Union, Racism, Resistance, and Revolution, is a part 3 of an international socialist organization study group.
Do you think that these promote revolution?
I think that these give a tremendous opportunity for students to get involved in extracurricular activities which would tend to direct them towards Marxist ideology and Marxist thinking.
A tremendous resource in understanding what children in America may be up against are individuals who have been raised and gone to school in communist-controlled government schools. It is also interesting to compare their statements with those of our college students. You will see these comparisons throughout this documentary.
The first thing they did was to force the teachers. The teacher that didn't sign alliance to the communists, they purged it, and they put new teachers, communist teachers.
And that's another thing in the education in Cuba today in the system. The teacher have to be a good Marxist. It doesn't matter whether that teacher knows how to read or write. That is irrelevant. as long as a good Marxist.
And most of these Marxist professors, they'll just laugh at you, which is my the professor I'm having now. He just laughs off every statement I have. And when I say something about the free market or anything, he goes, ha, 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 you would believe that, wouldn't you?
I recall when I was in the second grade, I was 8 years old, and my teacher found out that on Sundays I was going with my parents to church. So the next Monday, when I came to school, I was called in front of the classroom, about 36 pupils, and I have been humiliated, and they tried to put me down for the fact that I believe that God exists.
I was just scoffed at and called a McCarthyite.
And this is a very common harassment, intimidation, humiliation toward those who resist to embrace the communist ideology. It's a very common thing, and it is met at the kindergarten level, elementary school, high school, university, workplace, everywhere. It's the same abuse and many times atrocities.
There are two groups of teachers, I would say. First of all, the teachers who are about my age, who went through the whole life through the system, and they are new teachers. They have to be Marxists, they have to be members of the Communist Party. But still, there are old teachers left over who are just close before retirement. The membership is not a requirement. I mean, the membership of the Communist Party for these people are not required. However, they must do whatever the principal tells them, and so on.
As far as I know, and I've searched the departments, each department, whether it be education, political science, sociology, and of all the departments that I've searched for, I've only found one professor that was conservative. And I asked him, why is it that you're the only professor here who has these views? And he stated in effect that the professors, when they're screened to actually become professors, they ask them a series of questions and everything like that. And they really aren't looking for someone who will create that type of divisive attitude between the professors. When a professor comes in, they're interviewed by a board of other professors, and if they're not found to be thinking in the same line of manner, then it's not likely that they'll be accepted at university.
Later on in the university, when I was close to graduation, the engineering school, I was in the 4th year, I was, because of my good records, academic records, I was an honor student. They proposed me to accept membership in the Communist Party. I refused because of the total difference of doctrinal statement between my Christian faith and the communist ideology. I remember that soon after that I had some tests and my grades dropped drastically, and there was no reason except my refusal.
Were students' grades lower if they disagreed with the communist teacher's political views?
Of course, there is no other way. You either agree and pass, or if you don't agree and in any way you show that you don't agree without even telling the whole truth, you do not pass, and that's it. So you have to repeat. Usually, if somebody is to that much, they call it stubborn, that doesn't want to accept the indoctrination, he either has to repeat the whole year of all the subjects, or they have special schools for, they call it a little bit crazy people, for better indoctrination.
Mike, do you feel that your grades have ever been lower than they should have been because you disagree with a teacher's political viewpoints?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, two instances that I can refer to right now where I have actually the papers. I had done a research paper on the Strategic Defense Initiative, and it's something that I'm reasonably knowledgeable on and had gone way beyond the length and the number of sources that I needed. And as a matter of fact, the instructors had given me some sources that were from a different point of view, which some of them I even used to negate those points. I was graded solely on ideology. There was there's numerous comments on this report that I have right here, and none of them are on things that should be graded on, such as content or how well it was written. For example, it says here that this is a ideological manifesto, and if you were to look through it, I give each example for the statement and have evidence to back up each statement. He's arguing in numerous accounts here, including a quote that I had taken from Ronald Reagan concerning the Strategic Defense Initiative, and arguing with Ronald Reagan's quote.
So basically, what they were teaching us was like the contrast between the Soviet Union and the West. Always telling us that Soviet Union is good, and good.
And basically, it wasn't as much a class about Soviet foreign policy as it was about the better aspects of the Soviet Union in comparison to the United States.
Now, the typical day in all the Polish schools starts with the gathering in the assembly room or auditorium in the morning, where students are supposed to prepare some excerpts of the Bolshevik Revolution or what Lenin said. It doesn't last a long time, maybe about 15-20 minutes, but then the students are going to the classroom and start the day quoting the international song saying that we will fight till the whole world will be ours.
Another paper here is called the International Workers of the World, IWW. They have a motto on here: one union, one label, one enemy. And it's quite clear to see who's the enemy by this print in the back page that says, instead of the conservative motto, a fair day's wage for a fair day's work, we must inscribe on our banner the revolutionary watchword, abolition of the wage system. It is the historic mission of the working class to do away with capitalism. The army of production must be organized not only for the everyday struggle with capitalists, but also to carry on production when capitalism shall have been overthrown.
In Richard Wurmbrand's book, Tortured for Christ, he writes, "But the worst thing communists do is not that they torture and kill the bodies of men. They hopelessly falsify the thoughts of men and poison the youth and the children. They have put their men into positions of leadership in the churches to lead the Christians and to destroy the churches. They teach youth not to believe in God and Christ, but to hate these names. In what words can we express the tragedy of Christian martyrs who, coming home after years in prison, are received with scorn by their children, who in the meantime have become militant atheists?"
And you had a son that went to grammar school under Castro?
My son went to grammar school under Castro. Now, that was a different matter, and that was, even grammar school was indoctrination. Pure and simple indoctrination. We had to hire a tutor to come to my house in the evenings to undo all the damage that the communist teachers were doing during the day, and for that there was no God. There is no, you don't owe anything to your father or your mother. Being a mother is just a biological accident.
This is what they taught you.
That's what they taught at school. You own your allegiance to the state. The state is your mother, is your father, and is your God. We have to have a tutor to teach him that is a God, and we have to have a tutor to give him Christian education.
I would not have been ripe for communist ideology had I not already swallowed the evolutionary line in high school. And having gone to a public high school, I was a firm believer from a scientific viewpoint that all life arose spontaneously by an accident. There was no real plan or purpose to life. And in that void, something like communism, Marxism, is a lot easier to accept.
Not only are there many things happening to our children in public schools that are Christian children from our churches that we're not happy about or are not desirable because they're counterproductive to a child's faith, but I think we need to understand exactly how children are affected spiritually by some of these programs that are going on in our public schools. These programs are set up to be a mind-bending process that will undermine the faith of our children, so that when the process is completed, the child's faith in God would be totally destroyed.
But the trick of a communist, and this is what you really have to grasp clearly, they are not just going to get you into a movement. They're going to swap a whole set of values with their particular worldview, so that instead of just being friendly toward them or sympathetic toward them, you begin to think like them.
So do you think that controlling the schools is important to the feminists?
Very, very. Because you have to realize that when you control the school, you control the minds of the future.
Judging from your school days in Romania, how important was it to the communists to control the education of the youth?
This is very important. In fact, it's the most important thing.
The school is the one that forms the mind. So if those children are indoctrinated since they are small, they are going to grow up to be loyal communists.
Okay, I would like to tell you also about two other items that are part of the indoctrination. The first one is the special subjects that are telling the students about the socialist family, giving them as a model how the human should work and operate in the socialist environment and according to the rules of the Communist Party.
Recently, a grandparent sent us an essay written by his grandson who was 13 years old. The essay was entitled "The Tragedy in South Africa," and the teacher's comments failed to correct some of the spelling errors and the grammatical errors in the essay, but indicated that the student should have built into the story a sense of the main characters believing in certain socialist political goals, such as redistributing land and socializing medicine.
Now, if it comes to the other subjects which you would imagine are not related to politics or ideology, I'm talking like about mathematics, physics, electronics, mechanics. These subjects are also the ones where the teacher is supposed to tell the students about the superiority of the Soviet Union comparing to the West.
The indoctrination process starts at the preschool age, and so children from 4 to 6 years are already exposed to the communistic ideology, obvious to their level of understanding. It is a gradual process with a very definite purpose in mind, and the strategy developed to achieve the goal, it's very persistent and very precise.
The recruitment process that they use is real subtle. You don't even know you're being recruited.
How hard did your parents have to work at counteracting the things you were taught in school?
Very hard. I should like to mention that the instruction we received in home are biblically based on biblical principle. That is, the Bible says that teach a child the way he should follow, and when they will grow up, they will not depart from it. Also, it says that the fear of God, of the Lord, is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. These are basic principles which guided our parents in growing us as future adults. I come from a family with 6 children, and on a consistent and diligent, in a consistent and diligent way, our parents spent a lot of time training us in the biblical doctrine from an infant age. That's the reason why we couldn't be swayed so easily by any statements which ignored the absolute authority with God.
Of course, knowing the Lord is all important. But there are still a lot of students who, even though they know the Lord, they can be fooled. The difference is knowing God's Word and applying it, believing it, living on it. After I got saved in 1978 and started reading God's Word methodically, I can remember for the first time reading through Proverbs And in Proverbs chapter 1, if I had had these verses in my mind and in my heart, I don't believe any of the experiences that I went through college could have ever gotten to me. They could have never thrown me for the loop that they did. And it's Proverbs chapter 1, 10 through 14. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait to shed blood, let us lurk secretly for the innocent without cause, let us swallow them alive like Sheol, and whole like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all kinds of precious possessions. We shall fill our houses with spoil. Cast in your lot among us. Let us all have one purse. That's socialism to a T. That's exactly what it is. It preys upon the powerless. And it has this illusion that you're all going to share in the spoils. When really the Bible teaches that only by combining your fruits and your labors and your resources with the wisdom that God gives you can you create any kind of wealth. And that wealth is, God blesses those people with that live by His Word. Any system that just takes from those people that have created it just feeds on itself. And that's how these passages end. So are the ways of everyone who is greedy for gain. It takes away the life of its owners. That's it in a T. Wish I'd known it then. You know, not having known it back then set me back 7 years.
The doctrines of Marx, Lenin, and Stalin are consistently atheistic and intolerant of religion. However, your average American does not know enough about the doctrines to even recognize them when confronted with them.
Marxism can offer something that at one time appears very scientific. It can appeal to a person who has some sense.
And more, I just get news from different universities in the United States where exactly the same programs or the ways of teaching students are coming.
The New American Magazine did a story on the Marxist takeover of American universities in November of '89. So although the Berlin Wall may have come down, the walls we should be looking at are those of the university, those that are trying to trap the minds of our youth. Congressman Phil Crane is serving his 11th term in the U.S. House of Representatives. He taught history at Indiana University and Bradley University.
I think, Sharon, that throughout all of our lifetimes, the halls of academe have been dominated by people that we would define as left of center. And I left teaching back in 1967. I thought it was pretty bad then because of reports that I got back from students who were telling me of specific indoctrination in classrooms by decidedly left-wing professors. But I did not realize the magnitude of the problem today until I started to talk to some of the students who worked in my office as interns. And the biases, the crafting of curricula, that is designed to deny young people an appropriate education in the first place, but secondly, to positively indoctrinate. And then reading such revealing books as Charles Sykes' Prof Scam, I would hardly recommend that to everyone. I mean, it'll make you sick to find out that there are some professors making $100,000 a year and not teaching more than 3 credit hours a week. And they're running teaching assistants into their classroom, many of whom do not even speak English properly. And then he gets into also the degeneration of the curriculum and the biases.
Would you say that some teachers are promoting socialist or Marxist ideology without even realizing that they're doing it simply because they're following the teacher's guidebook?
I think that definitely is true. And I say that in part because when I was teaching at Bradley University, I was a history prof, and I observed that those students that were qualifying themselves to get licensed to teach had to go through the College of Education, and they could qualify as history teachers with only 24 credit hours. And so they could do it with a 6-hour survey course in U.S. history, a 6-hour survey in European history, a 6-hour survey in World Civ, a 6-hour survey in Latin American. In short, never get above a survey level. And they qualified as, quote, history teachers. Now, I had some of those students who came back to me after they were in teaching and told me how woefully inadequate they felt in the classroom. Well, we, by contrast, in the history department, In the College of Liberal Arts, we required 44 credit hours in history to be a history major, no more than 12 of which could be survey-level courses. And we reviewed over the preceding 5 years our history majors and found out they averaged 55 credit hours. In other words, they were 11 above the base requirement. And I said, now, who would you rather have teaching your youngster history? Someone who never got beyond a survey level but is technically licensed because he completed the cut and paste in the College of Education, or someone who really studied and mastered history? I think it is in part for those reasons that there are many with the most shallow kinds of understandings of their own disciplines that they are expected to master and teach, who have absorbed much of the bias without knowing the difference.
Due to the recent events in East Europe, should we expect socialist and Marxist professors to stop promoting socialism and Marxism?
I would kind of doubt it. It's going to make it a little awkward for some that have sat back and indicted our system as capitalism, and yet you see all these people who came out of those Marxist paradises rushing into the West because of the opportunity and the chance to be free and making the sacrifices they made. But as I say, so many of our intellectual Marxists in this country still view it as a utopian dream. And so they would rationalize their positions, notwithstanding all the evidence of Eastern Europe, on the grounds that, well, those were flawed systems.
He's explaining away all the problems in Eastern Europe through Marxist writings. He's saying, well, see, I mean, they've always talked about, those Marxist professors have always said, you can't judge Marxism by what has happened in Eastern Europe and everything like that. But they always want to compare capitalism to what's happened during the worst era of the United States. Mm-hmm. And they want to lock capitalism into the realities of the world, but Marxism gets to be this highty-flighty ideal which never can be tied to any realities. And again, we're reading different writings from Marxist philosophers, Lenin and Trotsky and different writers like that. And he's saying, see, their teachings right now show us that Marxism will succeed if it were only proposed in this proper way.
And as I say, I know the explanation of some of the more fuzzy-minded within the intellectual community will simply say, well, they weren't really committed properly to the Marxist doctrine because the Marxist doctrine would never have embraced that. But that is human nature. It's the frailty of human nature, and it's why our founding fathers created this system where we said government is a necessary evil. We've got to live with it. But we're going to live with it on limited terms, and it is there to secure our fundamental liberties. You know, we're all looking for a better world. Even presumably Karl Marx, but Karl Marx's ideology was man-oriented, and he actually believed in the perfection of man, and so he could talk about some nonsense heaven on earth kind of a situation devoid of our reliance on God Almighty. And we started out with the premise that we only can be perfected through God Almighty. And it will not happen in this life, and that's why we have government. So then you try and structure that government which is best to provide for the best benefits, greatest degree of personal liberty, greatest opportunities, and material blessings in this life. And we found that in this republic, and it is vital that we try and preserve it. But we've got to go after the climate that exists currently in our educational system to do that.
What can people do?
Well, I think the most important thing that can be done is what Accuracy in Academia is doing, and that is letting the parents, the taxpayers, and the other concerned citizens know what's going on. Because I think most of the time when parents send their students off to school, especially a school like Dartmouth or Harvard, both of which have excellent reputations, they don't really expect anything like this to happen. They don't think about it. And I think the first duty of a parent needs to be to make sure that the school that they're sending their student to is not going to commit some of these atrocities, both inside the classroom and outside the classroom, against their children.
You've got to rely on those few active students to get out there and question the professors, because the other students aren't going to, and the students, and then you've got that select minority who actually support what the professors say about Marxism and Soviet Union, things like that.
Other things that students can do on campuses involve making sure that a number of the students in the student assemblies and the other legislative bodies on campuses have representatives who are either conservative or, if they're liberal, that they're fair and that they'll be interested in promoting balance in campus programming. One example that makes the need for that clear involves something that happened at Canisius College in Buffalo, New York, where the student assembly refused to grant recognition, which means no money, no space for meetings, and no support whatsoever from the university, to a group of Young Americans for Freedom on the grounds that YAF is intolerant of communism.
And I've been told that, in effect, that anybody who disagrees with their view is not willing to actually sit down and learn. And that's not true. I want to learn.
Without the intervention of patriotic Americans, parents, and Christians, what are the implications to America?
Without that intervention, we cannot survive.
Posterity, you will never know how much it has cost my generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make good use of it. John Quincy Adams. What message will we leave the next generation?